There's a specific kind of silence that happens in a room when someone realizes their life is never going to be the same. I've sat in that silence more times than I care to count. Not as a creditor or a judge, but as someone who just wanted to listen. I remember sitting across from a man named Robert about 3 years ago. He was 62, had a beautiful home in the suburbs, and for 30 years he'd been the definition of successful. But as we sat there, he wasn't looking at his house or his awards. He was looking at a single manila folder that contained the news that his entire net worth had effectively evaporated. He didn't scream, he didn't cry. He just looked at his hands and asked me, "Where did the time go?" It's a haunting question, because in that moment, Robert realized he hadn't just lost his money. He felt like he'd lost the last 3 decades of his life that he'd traded for that money. We're taught to fear losing our wealth, but sitting with people who've actually walked through that fire taught me something much deeper. It taught me that our relationship with money is almost never about the math. It's about our identity, our safety, and the stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Today, I want to share with you what I learned from the people who lost everything, because their perspective might be the only thing that can actually save the rest of us from losing ourselves. We tend to look at financial ruin as a freak accident. We see it like a plane crash, something that happens to other people because of some catastrophic mechanical failure or a once-in-a-century storm. We tell ourselves that as long as we follow the rules, as long as we're responsible, it could never happen to us. But the truth, I found, is much more uncomfortable. Most people don't lose everything because of a single explosion. They lose it because of 1,000 small, invisible leaks that they were too proud or too scared to plug. Society likes to blame the victim. We say they were greedy, or they were stupid, or they didn't work hard enough. But when you sit with these people, you realize they were often the hardest workers in the room. They were the ones who stayed late, who took the risks, who played the game exactly how they were told to play it. The problem wasn't their effort. The problem was their architecture. They built their entire sense of self on a foundation that was never meant to be permanent. They mistook a temporary season of high income for a permanent state of being. And when that foundation shifted, as foundations always do, the whole structure came down. It's not about judging the fall. It's about understanding the physics of the building. One of the most profound things Robert told me was that he felt like he'd been living in a dream for 20 years. He called it the luxury of not knowing. When things are going well, when the market is up and the paychecks are clearing, we stop asking the hard questions. We stop looking at the fine print of our lives. We start to believe that our lifestyle is a right, rather than a result of specific, fragile conditions. Psychology calls this the Dunning-Kruger effect of wealth. The more we have, the more we think we're solely responsible for it, and the less we respect the role of luck and timing. I met a woman named Sarah who lost a thriving business during a sudden shift in her industry. She told me that for years she'd ignored the red flags because she couldn't afford to admit she was wrong. Her identity was the successful CEO. If the business failed, Sarah failed. So she doubled down. She put her personal savings in. She took out a second mortgage. She wasn't being greedy. She was being protective of the only version of herself she knew how to love. We do this in smaller ways every day. We stay in jobs that drain our souls because the salary justifies the pain. We buy houses we can barely afford because the neighborhood justifies our hard work. We are constantly trading our future freedom just to maintain our current image. But here is the turning point. In every single conversation I've had with someone who hit rock bottom, there was a moment, usually months after the initial shock, where the air changed? Robert told me that about 6 months after he lost the house, he was sitting in a small, one-bedroom apartment he'd rented. He was eating a simple meal, and for the first time in 20 years, his chest didn't feel tight. He realized that the everything he thought he had lost was actually a collection of things that had been owning him. He said, "Finn, I spent 30 years protecting a pile of bricks, and it took the bricks falling down for me to realize I was still standing." This is the shift from net worth to self-worth. It sounds like a cliché until you see it in the eyes of someone who has nothing else left. When the money is gone, the only thing remaining is the person you were while you were making it. Were you kind? Were you curious? Did you build relationships that weren't transactional? The people who recovered the fastest, the ones who found peace even without the big bank balance, were the ones who realized that money is just energy. It's a tool. It moves, it flows, it dissipates. But the you at the center of that flow is the only real asset you have. When you start to see money this way, your decision-making changes on a fundamental level. You stop asking, "How can I get more?" and start asking, "How can I be more resilient?" You realize that a smaller life with a wider margin of safety is infinitely more luxurious than a big life lived on a knife's edge. You start to value understated security over visible success. You realize that true wealth isn't the ability to buy anything you want, it's the ability to say no to anything you don't want. So, how do we practically apply this without waiting for a catastrophe to teach us? It starts with a process I call the great decoupling. You have to consciously separate your identity from your income. It sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. It means looking at your lifestyle and asking, if my income dropped by 40% tomorrow, who would I be? What would I still value? Who would still be sitting at my table? If the answer is no one or nothing, then you aren't building a life. You're building a stage set. Next, we have to look at our burn rate through the lens of psychology, not just math. Every fixed expense you add, the bigger car payment, the premium subscriptions, the club memberships, is a tether. It's a string tied from your ankle to your desk. The people who lost everything taught me that the most dangerous word in the English language is deserved. We think we deserve the upgrade because we worked hard, but the upgrade often requires us to work even harder just to maintain it. Start looking for strategic subtraction. What can you let go of today that would give you more breathing room tomorrow? Finally, we need to build what I call a soul reserve. This is different from an emergency fund. An emergency fund is for the car repairs. A soul reserve is a collection of skills, hobbies, and relationships that have absolutely nothing to do with your career or your bank account. It's the stuff that makes you you when the world stops clapping. For Robert, it was rediscovering his love for woodworking. For Sarah, it was volunteering at a local garden. These things don't pay the rent, but they provide the psychological insulation that prevents a financial loss from becoming a total human collapse. I want you to take a breath and really think about this. If you feel a sense of fear or tension right now, that's okay. It's a sign that you're actually looking at the truth. We live in a world that wants us to be anxious, because anxious people are easier to sell to. They're easier to keep in the waiting room of the middle class. But you've seen the cracks in the glass now. You've heard the stories of those who walked through the fire. You aren't failing because you worry about money. You're just human. But you don't have to be a slave to the fear of losing it. The goal isn't to be rich by some arbitrary standard. The goal is to be unbreakable. And you become unbreakable by realizing that your best years aren't a currency to be spent, but a life to be lived. Robert is doing well now. He doesn't have the big house, and he probably never will again. But he told me something last week that I'll never forget. He said, "I used to have $1 million and no time. Now I have a few $1,000s and all the time in the world, and I finally feel like a wealthy man." Progress isn't always about adding. Sometimes the greatest progress you can make is in the things you choose to leave behind. Just keep moving, one intentional step at a time. The view from a life lived on your own terms is worth any climb.